The Chunin Exams is one of the most iconic and one of the best arcs in the Naruto series, and I would even say in shonen as a whole. It is many people's favorite arc in the Naruto series, and for good reason. I don't blame people for thinking that, because there are so many great moments, iconic fights, a lot of character development and world building put together, and the arc itself, especially in the manga, is very fast-paced, even though it's pretty long. But even though it's a long arc, you don't feel as though it's long, because it's so great. Now, the premise for the Chunin Exams is not exactly complicated. The Genins, or the beginner Shinobis, are just trying to advance to the rankings of the Shinobi system. And if they pass the Chunin Exams, they are promoted to Chunin, getting a promotion, and just becoming better ninjas, getting more money for their missions. So they must undergo these very interesting trials that are crafted to test their abilities as ninja, and whether or not they deserve a promotion. Now, the Chunin Exams happens twice a year, so there's 2 opportunities for you to become a Chunin in any given year, but we just see one canon Chunin Exams in the Naruto series. It is implied that the trials change from exam to exam, especially if you'll take a look at the filler Chunin Exams that we see in Naruto Shippuden, but they seem to follow a similar structure. But in the canon Chunin Exams, there were 3 main trials: the written exams, the Forest of Death, and the 1v1 battles, with the preliminaries between the final round and the Forest of Death to essentially make it a little less crowded. And if you ask people what's their favorite part of the Chunin Exams, most people are gonna say the preliminaries, because of the Gaara versus Lee fight, which is fair because that is one of the best fights in the series. But usually their second pick, or many people's even favorite pick for the best part, is gonna be the Forest of Death itself, which is an extremely tense and even dark moment in the Naruto series. We are introduced to Orochimaru, this absolutely terrifying villain, especially in this part of the story. Orochimaru was an absolute menace and a force of nature, and there are many great things about the Forest of Death. However, the Forest of Death makes no sense. Now, I don't mean it doesn't make sense from a writing standpoint, I just mean it doesn't make sense in universe, and I'll be explaining why that's the case throughout the video. Now, in order for us to understand why the Forest of Death, as one of the trials of the Chunin Exams, is so bad, we have to analyze the 3 main motivations behind the Chunin Exams existence in the Naruto universe. Because at first glance, this exam serves to advance the Genins into the Chunin rank. We're trying to select the appropriate ninjas that are powerful enough to be Chunins, and yes, certainly for the characters participating in it, this is the main motivation behind the exams. They usually don't even think too much about it. They're just very invested into advancing into the Chunin rank. But if you think about it from the perspective of the Shinobi villages, having an entire exam for the purposes of just promoting your ninjas is kind of worthless, because if the Hokage feels like he could just promote anybody to Chunin or even Jonin, I mean, Jonins are actually promoted without any exams, because it's not many ninjas that become Jonins in the first place, so there's not really an exam for it. You just have to be very good. But there are many more Chunins around, so gotta have exams, right? No, you don't have to. It's very obvious when a shinobi is powerful enough to become a Chunin. I mean, Naruto spends the entire Naruto Shippuden era being a Genin, and he is way stronger than a Genin throughout the entire Shippuden era. I mean, Naruto's been stronger than a Genin ever since chapter 1, because he literally beats a Chunin in the very first chapter. And yet, nobody promotes him because he didn't pass the exams, because he was away from the village. And yes, in those filler episodes after the Naruto vs Sasuke fight, Naruto gets promoted to Jonin rank by Kakashi, but that's not really canon, is it? And even still, he didn't do the exams again. I mean, there's an OVA that he fought Konohamaru that he actually did the Chunin Exams again, but it's also completely filler. But you get what I mean. If the Hokage felt like a particular Genin was performing really well, showing good shinobi skills and leadership throughout their missions during just their normal shinobi careers, it would have been very easy to just say, okay, you're Chunin now, congratulations, you're promoted. This would actually be easier, because doing the Chunin Exams actually takes money. You have to pay for the proctors, you have to pay for the locations, maintenance and all that, you have to pay for medical ninjas that are eventually gonna heal people that get wounded. And yes, technically you can say that these shinobis, like the proctors and the medical ninjas, are from your village, the hosting village, but they are ninjas working on missions, therefore they're getting paid for it. This is the entire purpose of you being a ninja, okay? You do missions in exchange for money. So it does take money to make the exams happen. Now, one could say that putting Genins through the Chunin Exams is a good place for training, but putting Genins through regular shinobi missions that you get paid for is also shinobi training in a sense that you acquire experience from. After all, every single phase of the Chunin Exams is just a type of shinobi mission simulated into a tournament format. If you want your ninjas to acquire experience, you can just send them to normal missions. You don't have to make this entire tournament around it and spend extra money. So the argument saying that, oh, the Genins have to go to the Chunin Exams to acquire more experience and all that, I mean, I guess it's a different type of experience, but it's not as though they really need that to develop as ninjas, instead of just getting regular missions. So even though the selecting process for Genins to becoming Chunins is a part of why the Chunin Exams exist, it's definitely not the main reason for it. There are two far more important reasons as to why the exams even happen in the first place. Now, obviously, the Leaf Village is not the only village participating in the exams. There are about half a dozen other villages that send their ninjas to participate in the exams with the Leaf Ninjas, and because the Chunin Exams we saw happened in the Leaf Village itself, obviously there were more Leaf Ninjas than otherwise, and because the Leaf Village is one of the greatest villages in the world, there's gonna be more ninjas from the Leaf Village just by default. The only other great village that participated in the exams was the Sand Village, and they are smaller than the Leaf Village canonically, so they have less ninja. Having ninjas from other nations is not by mistake or a coincidence, no. This is the main purpose behind it. The Chunin Exams is nothing but a battleground between these nations, kind of a proxy war to show the power of their ninja, projecting geopolitical power and establishing yourself as a powerful shinobi nation/village. And yes, technically every single nation that participates in the Chunin Exams that we see in the Leaf Village are all allies, or at least they have pacts among each other, even though the Sand Village definitely breaks their allied pact in the end of the Chunin Exams arc because they attack the Leaf Village with Orochimaru and stuff. In theory, they are all allies, so why would they be just projecting their power against each other? Well, because if you take a look at the map of the Naruto series and the villages that participate in the Chunin Exams, they all border the Land of Fire, except the Land of Wind, which is the land of the Sand Village. But that's an exception because it's one of the great nations as well. But it's important to project power against your neighbors, especially the ones that border you, just for geopolitical reasons. From the perspective of Leaf Village, they want to make sure that their smaller neighbors know who the boss is, and the smaller neighbors want to say, yeah, well, we're not so bad, you know, we're kind of strong too, respect us, okay? So instead of going to war against each other and having actual conflicts, they simply simulate conflict against each other with their Genins in this tournament arc. This is pretty much real-world Olympics. Instead of countries going to war against each other, they try to project their power in different ways. Sports, that's a way to do it. And the only exception is that in the Chunin Exams, people can actually die and they actually fight against each other for real with killing intent and all that. And there's another very important reason for the Chunin Exams to even exist, which is to show prospective clients the power of their shinobi. Shinobi are hired for many reasons, and rich and influential people have the needs to hire ninjas to do some missions for them, so they're going to be watching the Chunin Exams very closely to see if there's any talented ninja that they may want to hire in the future. And this is also very good for the ninja villages because they show the types of ninjas that they have. It's essentially marketing for the villages themselves. If their ninjas perform well in the Chunin Exams, the people watching the exams are going to say, oh, okay, this village is very powerful, they have good ninjas in the Chunin Exams, so I might want to hire shinobis from them. So power projection is the most important reason for the Chunin Exams. Projecting your power against the neighboring nations, and also projecting your power to your possible client so that they're interested in purchasing ninjas from you to do their missions, and therefore you move the shinobi economy, you keep the shinobi system going more healthily this way because more money is going to come in, and it's all a positive snowball effect if your ninjas perform well in the Chunin Exams. So having this in mind, why is the Forest of Death such a bad trial for the Chunin Exams proper? Before we answer that, we have to answer why the written test and the finals are such great trials for the Chunin Exams. So the written test is a test that is not terribly high stakes. If you fail, there's no chance of you dying or getting hurt, and it's just a very good proficiency test to essentially filter out the candidates that have any chance whatsoever. It's also a much less demanding test from a logistical standpoint because you just need a pretty large room and some proctors, and it lasts for an an hour or so it's not like the Forest of Death that lasts for 5 days. So it makes sense to filter most of the candidates in the first trial, and so the trial is not that complicated for you to even create. And yes, even though you're not impressing anyone, any neighboring nations or prospective clients by having your ninjas performing well in a written test, this is just good logistically speaking, as I said. It just makes sense for you to cut out the ones that are just not prepared to advance from the get-go. And then we have the finals of the Chunin Exams, which is the quintessential way of impressing people with your ninjas. I mean, you essentially put the most skilled ninjas, the ones that made all the way through the final rounds, to duck it out in the middle of a massive arena crowded with people just watching and eager to see what they're capable of. On top of that, you can charge the entrance and get some money back for the expenses you had to incur to just run the Chunin Exams in your village. So the finals makes absolute sense in every single regard when it comes to the purposes of the exams. You also are testing your ninjas, obviously, and the ones that are deemed worthy of being Chunin are going to be promoted. But the Forest of Death isn't exactly like that, is it? It's without a doubt the most difficult part of the Chunin Exams. I mean, you can argue that fighting against a very powerful opponent in the finals or the preliminaries is very difficult, but you have to survive for 5 days in the Forest of Death, or until you reach the tower, but you also have to engage other teams and collect their scrolls so that you can even advance. There's going to be combat, there's no proctor that can, interfere if things are going badly for you, and most importantly, nobody else is watching, so there's nothing really that you can do to quote-unquote impress other ninja nations or clients. It's not even practical for you to impress clients in a trial that lasts for 5 days. I mean, if this was in a reality show format with hidden cameras all around the forest, and if Naruto had that type of technology, that would be great. I mean, I would certainly watch it, and it would be an amazing way to showcase the power of your ninjas, but that's just not the case. There are no hidden cameras, there's nothing really recording what's happening in the Forest of Death, and that's the main problem here. Your ninjas are not projecting their power to other neighboring nations, clients are not watching, so there's really no point to the exams other than testing out your ninjas, which you could do in many other ways that don't involve putting them under such great risk. As I said, there is no proctor. Shikamaru even asks Anko when she's briefing everybody about the Forest of Death, "Oh, can I just give up in the middle of the thing?" And Anko says, "Yeah, sure you can, but you're probably gonna die because people are not gonna be merciful with you." And we saw several Genins dying in the Forest of Death. Ninjas are very expensive to create. Ninja villages exist for the sole purpose of creating ninjas, which is a very complicated process that requires resources and knowledge and expertise. Ninjas are probably the most precious resource of any nation in the Naruto continent, and throwing them into a meat grinder, which is the Forest of Death, is not the most intelligent way to go about promoting them or even projecting your power. Oh yes, you can say that the risk of death is always imminent in the life of a shinobi, which is fair. Ninjas have to be cold and calculating, never giving in to their emotions. There's all that kind of stuff. You can say that the Chunin Exams Forest of Death is a great way of trying ninjas if they are capable of doing such things, but you can also do that with other types of missions. Missions that will actually be helpful to your village and nation instead of just throwing ninjas in the Forest of Death to kill each other for no reason because nobody is watching. So you're not projecting your power geopolitically by having ninjas fighting in the Forest of Death and getting killed because they want to be promoted. Also, because there is no proctor, imagine the type of things that can happen if somebody, tries to invade the Forest of Death and do some naughty things to the small children fighting in there, like putting a curse mark on them, or, I don't know, taunting them into relinquishing themselves to darkness and killing people to infiltrate the Forest of Death. Candidates of the Chunin Exams, it's not as though this could ever happen, Whoopsie. It appears Orochimaru did just that. And I mean, it's the perfect situation for him. I want to go after this Uchiha guy with a Sharingan. I really want his body eventually. Let me go infiltrate the Forest of Death and do whatever I want with him. Nobody's gonna be watching. It's gonna be very easy. Also, think about the foul things that a village can pull if they know in advance that the exam that they're gonna be taking has no proctor. Like, imagine if Hiruzen gather around all the Genins that are going to participate in the Chunin Exams and say, "Okay guys, don't battle between yourselves. Just kill every single other ninja together. Like, the whole battalion of you that participate in the Forest of Death, you're just gonna go ahead and kill every other Genin in there because, you know, we just have to eliminate the competition. This is a possibility. Orochimaru kind of does that with his own sound team in the Forest of Death. He tells them to go after Sasuke and kill Sasuke because he wants to test Sasuke against them. But imagine if every single ninja from the Leaf Village decided to band together and, you know, just go on a murder spree or something. There are so many problems with this exam. Like, it's a Shinobi World. Shinobis are always trying to cheat to win things and fulfill their missions. They are always trying to get unfair advantages over their competition. So having this Chunin exam test where there's no proctor, there's no surveillance whatsoever. There's just a surveillance camera in the tower in the middle of the forest, so it doesn't really matter what people are doing in the forest itself. There are obviously going to be bad actors. There are obviously going to be people doing things that are not supposed to be done in the Chunin exams because it's not the purpose of the exams. And also, the Genins are just gonna die in there. They have to sign a waiver saying that they, you know, the Leaf Village has no responsibility for whatever happens to them in the middle of the forest. We don't know for certain what's the percentage of deaths that happens in the Forest of Death, but if I were a betting man, I would say it's about 30%. Like, 30% of the Genins entering the forest are not gonna make out of it. I mean, we know that at least 50% are not gonna pass the test, but it doesn't mean they're all gonna die. But even still, even Hinata, Akiba, and Shino kill people with those leeches kind of in the beginning of the Forest of Death trial. So it seems like, well, it is what it is, man. People are not gonna make out of that. Why would you send your most talented ninjas into this meat grinder? I mean, what's Hiruzen even thinking? He's sending the last Uchiha that he has and the Jinchuriki of the freaking Nine Tails into this thing where they could easily both die because Team 7 and also the other rookies are much less experienced than anybody else in there, and you're sending your two most important assets, gambling that they will come out alive of there. I mean, what would have happened if Naruto was killed in the Forest of Death, which almost happened more than once? The Leaf Village would have lost the Nine-Tailed Fox, the most powerful chakra creature in the history of the world. I mean, not counting the 10 tails, but you get what I mean. It's by far the most powerful tail beast. Now, I guess you can make that same argument for every mission that Naruto goes on, but in those missions, Naruto is accompanied by more experienced ninjas such as Kakashi, and those missions are actually important for the Leaf Village. The Forest of Death does nothing. It doesn't advance the agenda for the village politically because nobody's watching it. If you want to display the power of our Jinchuriki slash tail beast, you gotta show it to people around you, which actually happens in the final round when Naruto fights against Neji. But sending Naruto and Sasuke, the last Uchiha, into the Forest of Death for them to, you know, have a chance of dying in there, especially when people like Orochimaru can infiltrate the place, is not the smartest idea. Think about this. Even if Naruto and Sasuke don't die in the Forest of Death because of the brutality of the test, they are still big targets for many different nations and even organizations around the world. Naruto has the most powerful Biju inside of him, and it's not exactly a secret. Everybody pretty much knows that that guy is the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. And we know from the Naruto lore that many different organizations over time have tried to capture the Nine Tails. The Ginkaku brothers, they tried that, they failed. Madara tried that, they failed. Now the Akatsuki is trying that, and they eventually succeed when Madara takes the Nine Tails out of Naruto, but it takes a long time. And sure, it wasn't general knowledge at that point during the Chunin exams that the Akatsuki was after tail beasts. We don't know exactly how much information the Leaf Village know by that point. We only find out that they are after the Nine Tails when Jiraiya comes back to the village, which is after the Forest of Death. But it's not that much time, you know, between the Forest of Death and when Jiraiya tells Kakashi about what the Akatsuki is after, which happens after the death of the third Hokage when the Chunin exams ends and Itachi and Kisame return to the village. So maybe Jiraiya had already sent some information back to the third Hokage saying, okay, take care of Naruto because there's some people after the Nine Tails, really powerful people by the way. And now you're sending him into a forest with nobody really looking after him whatsoever. And the same thing can be said about Sasuke. The Sharingan is something very rare in the Naruto series. Now, obviously, it's not something as important as the Nine Tails, especially like a base Sharingan is not that big of a deal, but still, it's something people crave. Orochimaru was literally in the forest to do that. He didn't want to pluck the Sharingan out of Sasuke's sockets, which he could have easily done if he wanted to, but he wanted to get Sasuke's attention so that Sasuke would eventually go to him. So, the Forest of Death is one of the causes for Sasuke leaving the village seeking more power with Orochimaru. If Sasuke hadn't encountered Orochimaru there, maybe Orochimaru could have arranged another meeting, but if Sasuke was accompanied by a more powerful ninja like Kakashi, for example, things could have gone differently. Perhaps Orochimaru would never be able to put the curse mark on Sasuke. And I mean, it's not as though the Leaf Village has some recent history with people trying to capture the Nine Tails in Jinchuriki and people with powerful Kekkei Genkai eyes. It's not as though a few years ago a diplomat from the Cloud Village tried to capture Hinata for her Byakugan, which eventually caused the death of Neji's dad. And it's not as though a couple of decades ago the Cloud Village tried to capture Kushina, the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails at the time, to get the Nine Tails for themselves, and Minato had to stop them. Oh yeah, and by the way, Neji and Hinata, two Byakugan users, were also in the Forest of Death. Eyes that the village knows people really crave, just like the Sharingan, and nobody's really watching over them. Orochimaru wasn't even the only infiltrated spy in the Forest of Death itself. Kabuto was also a spy. If he wanted to kill everybody in there, except for Gaara, arguably, he would have. Kabuto is about Kakashi's level. This is said time and time again. Now, I don't think Kabuto is stronger than Kakashi. I think Kakashi definitely beats him in a 1v1, but he is a high Jonin fighter. Also, what's stopping other villages from sending people that are quote-unquote Genins, but actually they're not, they're Chunin or Jonin level, to just kill Genins from other villages during the Forest of Death? Someone like Kabuto, I can see that happening. It's a very good strategy to eliminate the Genins when they are pretty weak and not powerful enough to threaten you. So you just send some more powerful ninjas disguising themselves as Genins. I mean, there isn't really an age limit as far as we know in the Chunin Exams, so you can just send some very experienced ninjas that people don't know much about. I mean, obviously if you send somebody like Kakashi, famous worldwide, people would know something is up, but that's why you have something like the Yambu, people that nobody really know because they wear masks and they're not famous, they're powerful, but, well, they're very concealed. Put them through the Forest of Death, let them kill several of your enemy nation ninjas, capture a few Sharingans and the Nine Tails, and then leave. Nobody's really gonna do anything about it. It's gonna be too late when they find out. Really, if you capture someone during the first day of the Forest of Death, it's gonna take at least 5 days, the entire duration of the exam, for them to notice, oh, these people haven't returned. Maybe they died. Oh, we couldn't find their corpses. That's weird. There should be a sign. Maybe a pretty big snake in the middle of the forest ate them because they were animals as well. So imagine the plethora of problems here. It's so insane that the village lets this happen. Now, yes, the final rounds of the preliminaries also have risks. Hayate and Genma said, okay, you can fight with whatever means you want. I will stop things if they get too ugly and if somebody isn't able to continue, but if you die, you know, you die. So if you think like you're not gonna make it, surrender, that I'll stop the fight. There was a risk of death, but no ninjas died during the preliminaries or the finals. I mean, some of them got extremely hurt, like Rock Lee and Hinata, but before the finishing blow was dealt, they were saved. I mean, Lee was saved because Guy was watching the fight, because Hayate wasn't gonna do anything to save the guy, so Guy had to jump in and blow away Gaara-san. But you get what I mean, at least in those fights, it wasn't like almost a guarantee that a sizable number of the candidates would die, therefore throwing away the precious resources of your village, the ninjas. So when I said that the only canon Chunin exams we see is the one in Naruto Part 1, I kinda lied, because we actually see brief flashbacks to Obito and Kakashi's Chunin exams back in the day, and in there we see an intermediate round of the Chunin exams that's much more interesting than the Forest of Death, just from an in-universe perspective. It's a team fight, a 3v3. Instead of you having to go to the Forest of Death, you do that 3v3 and it's proctored by, well, a ninja from the Leaf Village. The only problem I see with those team fights in the flashback is that they don't have anybody watching them, really. It seems like they did that in the Forest of Death itself instead of doing it in the stadium. Why wouldn't you want to show that to the spectators? I mean, I guess that a 3v3 would be even more interesting than one, depending on your taste, and you could charge more tickets, get more revenue from the tournament. So that would be a perfect way to do an intermediate phase for the Chunin exams if you want to project more power and acquire more influence because the power of your shinobi. But Obito's Chunin exams has a stark difference from Naruto's Chunin exams, which is that, well, as far as we can see at least, the only village participating in those exams is the Leaf Village. And we do know that the joint Chunin exams is something kinda new in the Naruto verse. It wasn't always done like that. Before, the Chunin Exams was something that was held in the villages themselves, with shinobi from the village and just them, and that's why the second test wasn't as deadly as the Forest of Death. I mean, Forest of Death, there's death in the name. You know, it's very much implied what's going to happen when they're there. The thing is, before, the Chunin Exams were just, you know, a cool little competition in the village to see who was eligible to become a Chunin, and I would even say that it probably encouraged competition among the ninjas from the same village, encouraging them to get more powerful and actually pass the exams, not really trying to project your geopolitical power like in the new Chunin Exam, so that's probably why the battle between squads wasn't held in the middle of the arena, which is kind of a waste. But then the joint Chunin Exams changed it all, and now the Chunin Exams as a whole is just much more important because of its geopolitical significance in the Naruto-verse. So if you analyze things coldly, it doesn't make sense for you to send your ninjas into the Forest of Death so that they can get killed without anybody even seeing what they did, without them doing anything worthwhile for your village. It's just a meat grinder. But this isn't bad writing whatsoever, because the Forest of Death is another symptom of the sick and failing shinobi system that governs the nations in the world. A system Hashirama and Madara created so that children wouldn't have to die in the battlefield anymore, because this happened a lot during the Warring States period, so much so that the average lifespan was 35 years old, and yet it didn't work. Sure, Hashirama's intentions were good, but now, instead of clans fighting clans, it's villages fighting villages, still sending children into the battlefield. We see that in Kakashi's flashback, where he, Obito, and Rin, three 13-year-olds essentially, are fighting in a war. And also a system that has an exam so that your ninjas can advance, that puts them through a trial of death, where they are encouraged to kill each other even though they are kids. I am pretty sure that if Hashirama saw what the Chunin Exams were in Naruto's era, he would have been appalled. So I created the village for kids not to die anymore, and you're just throwing them into the Forest of Death? And if you think about it, because it's a joint Chunin Exams with other villages, you have to project your political power. You have to look strong. You know, you can't show any weakness to your neighbors, otherwise, you know, you're gonna be vulnerable. So, you have to make the Chunin Exams very tough when you're hosting them. That's why the Forest of Death is so scaring and intimidating and difficult. If the Leaf Village just made, you know, this kinda easy, or maybe not easy, but just not dangerous trial for their Chunins to go through, the other villages would be like, oh, these guys are soft, that's all we have to do? Oh, that's kinda easy. I mean, Leaf Village, man, I mean, those guys are weak. And I would bet it's the same in every single nation that hosts the Chunin Exams, at least up until the end of the Fourth Great Ninja War, where nations became friendly and the need for projecting political power diminished substantially. So even though the Forest of Death doesn't make sense when you first look at it, why would you send children to die in the battlefield? It makes sense for the story and the cynical characters that rule over the shinobi world, using their children as pawns in a much larger game without really caring about the consequences of what happens in the Forest of Death. And when we talk about the Forest of Death, we're talking about the Leaf Village here, which usually are much more lenient with their ninjas than other villages in the world. I mean, obviously the Leaf Village has committed many atrocities as well. I'm not saying like they're the good guys. I mean, the entire Uchiha clan massacre was terrible, but you definitely get a vibe from the Leaf Village that they're not as strict and follow those hard shinobi rules, no emotions, nothing whatsoever, as other villages. Can you imagine how rough the Chunin Exams in the Bloody Mist village would be? A village that forced their prospective ninjas, even before they graduated from the academy, to kill their best friends in the academy so that they could graduate into being shinobi. What would the Chunin Exams for them look like? I imagine, like, because the Chunin Exams were already pretty rough for the Leaf Village, and there was nothing as extreme in the Ninja Academy in the Leaf Village. I mean, you had to show that you're good at ninjutsu and had shinobi skills, and then you pass. You didn't have to kill your best friend. So I can only imagine what they would do in the Mist Village. And I hate giving credit to Boruto, but the second phase of the Chunin Exams in Boruto, even though the arc is absolute garbage, actually, it makes sense. It's a capture the flag game where squads fight against each other in this kind of a city environment. And because there are cameras in the Boruto verse and, you know, streaming, people can watch it on TV, which is stupid, but still. It fulfills the objectives of the Chunin Exams. And sure, it's not proctored on site. There there are proctors watching it from the cameras. I'm not sure if they would even be able to stop them from killing each other if it came to that. But at least you're showing what the ninjas are doing in that situation. It's not like the Forest of Death where you're just like, oh, okay, fend for yourselves. We don't care. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Like this video to help me with the YouTube algorithm. And also ring the notification bell so you always know when the videos come out. Watch this other cool Naruto video right here. And thank you so much for watching.